Hello, everybody. Dave Neal here, stand-up comic and host of Bachelor Nation News. And it's my wedding week. I don't know if you guys knew that, but I'm off in Mexico getting hitched with friends and family. In the meantime, I've got some videos for you guys in a very, very fascinating conversation in this video regarding Bachelor's fandom and different ideologies that exist within the franchise. Do me a favor, follow me on Instagram at DNeals. And if you want behind-the-scenes content regarding my wedding, you can go to patreon.com/Dave Neal. I will be posting the full live stream video of the ceremony. I'm not going to air it live, but I'm going to share it with you guys after it's done, just to make sure there's no glitches and Wi-Fi issues and all that jazz, but you can go check that out. Now, just a couple weeks ago, I stumbled upon this Instagram reel from Marilyn.movies.
I wrote my master's dissertation on The Bachelor.
So she goes into this amazing 3-minute conversation about the Bachelor's progressive fandom, but rather than play that for you, which you can go watch on her Instagram and TikTok at Marilyn.movies, enjoy my conversation with Marilyn. We are so excited for this conversation today. We have Marilyn.movies, aka Marilyn, here to talk about her dissertation. Where do we even begin? You did a master's dissertation on The Bachelor.
Yes, and at the London School of Economics and Political Science, so not an expected topic for that place.
Now, did you always know you wanted to dive deep within the Bachelor lore to discuss these things, or how did that come about?
I have been obsessed with The Bachelor since Emily Maynard's season, and I feel like it's just slowly taken up more of my life. And I started to do recaps on my Instagram, but I didn't enter graduate school expecting to do this. It just at first was maybe a joke, and then the joke became real, and I'm so glad I did it now.
Yeah, I caught your content earlier this past week when you made a TikTok and Instagram reel where you said it's a dissertation on progressive ideology, fandom, and this psycho franchise. I know we trigger a lot of our audience when we talk about progressive ideology because there's just this term when certain people hear progressive, they hear socialism and all these crazy things. What do you mean by progressive ideology?
So by progressive, I'm basically referring to the entire left side of the political spectrum within the US. And I'm mostly talking about cultural issues. It's being feminist, it's being anti-racist. I'm not referring as much to socialism, though some of the people I interviewed would maybe identify that way. And I'm making the contrast between all those ideals and what I would say is a conservative text. The Bachelor promotes traditional ideas of marriage. It's about a man and a woman coming together. They get married or engaged very quickly within knowing each other. It's about going on dates and wearing fancy dresses. Regardless of how you think that the show has evolved, which it has, and including like more people of color, and it's a bit more racy and that it talks about sex, it's still at its core within our culture, I would say, is conservative. But my paper is talking about this really passionate corner of the fandom that I find myself in, where we're constantly critiquing, how many people of color are on the show, whether there's any queer people. Now we have a campaign on having more representation in terms of body type. So it's this weird ideological dilemma of loving the show, but knowing that it really goes against these ideals that we say we have.
Yeah, and you see a lot of people that are alumni that stick around the show because they think they can help change it. A Michelle Young is still associated with the show versus a Rachel Lindsay who's like, you know what, I did a couple years. They're not, where I want them to be. I have to remove myself. So I guess there is this sort of idea of working within the system and using your voice as a sort of vote for progress. I feel like when people talk about a lot of the changes with regards to like demanding better from the show, it sort of all comes from a combination of like Twitter culture where we can like kind of group our voices together along with the Black Lives Matter movement and the Me Too movement. All these separate movements they all have good intentions to keep the conversation going towards more inclusivity. Do you see this making any difference within the franchise itself, or do you think they're just trying to do the bare minimum to keep all of their different audiences happy?
You know, I wish the answer was the former, but right now, especially given them not addressing blackface in After the Final Rose with Eric Schwar, however we say his name, I feel like it's definitely in the direction of just trying to placate both sides. And at the end of the day, the show is not pleasing either side. Conservative people feel the show is maybe gone too far in this direction, and then progressive fans are equally pissed. So I think the show is in a tough spot. I don't know how it's going to sort itself out of this, because I do think it made these positive strides, and that has allowed this fandom to include so many progressive people. Thinking earlier about Rachel Lindsay and Michelle Young, and I think something that gets lost is that people think that the fandom is asking for perfection from the show and its contestants. And I don't think that's the case, or at least it's not the case for me. And I look at someone like Rachel Kirkconnell, and I think that it certainly wasn't my apology to accept, but I think she did a stellar job of doing an actual apology that came across as very genuine. And if you look at who she surrounds herself with, she has many girlfriends who are women of color. She has a black boyfriend. And I look at that and think, this is someone that I think genuinely took on this issue and had a good conversation. And that's why I'm okay supporting someone like her, even if she made a mistake. And so I think that's what we're asking as fans, is that these things are going to come up. It's not that I think the show can somehow make sure that there are no contestants ever who are going to have a controversy, but it's that the show and those contestants are able to step forward and show that they have watched a documentary, read a book, maybe taken a US history class, and are educated about these issues.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's anything wrong with having these sorts of conversations. And there's the whole like counsel versus cancel idea. And I know cancel culture has like a wide sort of net for what it actually means. But I don't think expecting perfection in every moment is good. I think the idea of growth and learning has to come with leaving space that every single year there'll be people that were raised in either a racist town or from an ignorant little cul-de-sac community. And we all come from these different areas, and rather than hide it, let's just discuss and shine light on it. I think that's the easiest thing to do. The big question people are asking with Eric's blackface resurfaced from 2011 is, what exactly is the show's responsibility for highlighting people's history as it may or may not pertain to their current relationship? As we know, Rachel Kirkconnell's Lady Antebellum, or sorry, excuse me, Antebellum South photos, those photos obviously made sense to talk about because it was an interracial relationship versus what Eric's situation is more of a character look at where he comes from. What's the show's responsibility there to have these conversations?
So, I mean, I disagree that it's less relevant because it's only white people involved. At least for me and for what Gabby has said about who she is, it would be important to me that my partner agree with my ideas on this front. So I do think it's relevant. And I also think the way we push the needle forward is actually for white people within their own spaces to have these conversations, not necessarily just putting it only on when there's black people in the room. So I think that's one piece. I think the other piece is, I mean, we have Michelle Young sitting in the audience, and she felt silenced and blindsided. She thought, and the other women there with her, Becca and Caitlin, they thought they were there to have some sort of conversation. So I think that's another part that makes me feel uncomfortable and icky about it, is knowing that they were sitting there thinking that they'd been brought to have a conversation. And I don't know if they assumed that or if they were promised that, but I think if the show is going to pay lip service to these movements and say, Bachelor Nation, we hear you and we love you, that horrible ending at AFR, I think they do have to face up to talking about it. And it doesn't need to be a really like intense thing. It can, if he's genuinely sorry and he doesn't, he doesn't align with that anymore, then I don't think it means that person is canceled. It just means that we can like have a listening moment because it happened and you can't just sweep it under the rug. And I again always turn to people of color when these things come up. If that's what they're asking to have happen, if they want this to be addressed, then to me it needs to be addressed.
Yeah, I agree. There was way too much time for the 3 hour finale to not have this conversation. My question
It was
is,
awful.
yeah, my question is whether or not the show is afraid to put Jesse Palmer in that position to have that conversation. I'm not really sure. I'm pretty strong on my conspiracy that the show let the podcast have the conversation, knowing they were going to be playing to their liberal base, and the conservative, maybe older audience. Not to say all conservatives are older, but there is a audience that's never listened to the podcast, that just leaves ABC on. In that audience,
Mhm.
they didn't give them that chance to talk about it. It's almost like if you're it's like I always talk about how corporations are considered psychopaths because they're just going to do whatever they can do to maintain whatever revenue. They're going to slap a pride sticker on during Pride Month, a breast cancer awareness sticker on during that month. They're just going to put the Black Lives Matter box on if they feel like that's what they need to do. And if they're a company that sells guns, they're going to do Blue Lives Matter. They don't care
Yeah.
one way or another. It's about selling whatever your brand is, and in this case, it's getting as much rating juice as they can. But that doesn't mean I don't fault them. I just think again, the only way to bend change is to either boycott or raise enough stink, getting the alumni who have sway to have conversations. I mean, you have people like Katie Thurston, who doesn't get nearly enough credit. The day before her filming starts, she tweets Chris Harrison shouldn't be on this season, like too soon. And that's a tweet that is for sure not approved by the producers. And she
Yeah.
just throws it out there. That's kind of the allyship that I see as like, whoa, these are big moves. I think so many people on the show are afraid to make those moves because the show holds over your head accessibility, being on Bachelor in Paradise. If you don't play by the rules, you're excommunicated. It's kind of cult-like in that sense. What do you think about any guilt that exists as a progressive person watching a show that only will do better if forced to?
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of what my paper is kind of reckoning with and like what do we want as fans out of this show? And I found I kind of had one contingent who because my project was interviewing fans and I had one side. I'll quote one of my interviewees. She said, just make it white people being fools, and that the show is best when it's stupid gladiators. And she thought that the end of Clayton's season was a perfect example of that. And it's just less painful when you remove people of color, queer people, all these marginalized identities, and get back to being silly. So that's one side. And this was an Indian woman who said this to me. One of my favorite quotes in my paper. But on the other side, I had people who said, "You know what? I don't want to be complacent and just say whatever, screw it. We're not going to deal with these issues. We want the show to do it, and even if it's messy, even if they handle the conversation with Eric poorly, it's better than having no conversation at all." So, it is a tricky thing. I personally am reckoning with my own guilt. I felt icky watching Bachelor in Paradise, honestly, because of how poorly I thought they handled AFR and also just, outside of race, I felt like this last season really perpetuated a lot of like misogyny in Rachel's edit and the critique she's got online. So I don't know. I don't know how to feel. I do feel guilty about it. But I keep being here. And I think the reason for that, and another argument of my piece, is because of the fandom and because it is this really participatory community where I think important issues kind of do get addressed and they do get put in people's faces, but it's maybe not the show that's doing it. It's players like Katie Thurston, or, I've been really impressed by Becca Kufrin in the past few weeks. I thought she was mostly a show company man at this point, but I was impressed by her talking on the podcast and saying, I did not handle previous situations well. And I think you could hear the growth in the way that she talked to Rachel Lindsay about Black Lives Matter 2 years ago, to her really owning it now, and she wasn't stumbling over her words. So I take those wins, I guess. I'm excited to see that happen, and I'm curious whether the people on Paradise, I mean, we have a lot of black contestants on Paradise right now. I wonder if they will use their voice in any way. Obviously the show stopped filming, but it's hard to say. The franchise may just slowly go by the wayside. But
Yeah, it's well, when it comes to a traditional dating show, like you said before, it really does hold on to a lot of these old school, we say old school values. There's really no way to say it, but it's a very you know, which obviously is ridiculous. They're getting engaged in 2 weeks. They have this weird fantasy suite, but if you have sex before the fantasy suite, you get slut shamed by this audience.
yeah,
And I don't know if my demographic is as reflective as the actual demographic that watches the show. Like, it might skew a little younger being on YouTube, but I've got from teens to 80s women watching. 92% of my audience is women, and they are across the spectrum from far left to far right, and from progressive to conservative. Some have conservative values, but progressive, but certain politic issues are left leaning. So it's really all over. When you talk about being a progressive, how do you feel like you can connect with somebody? Because we're going to have this issue with upcoming elections. How do you feel like you can connect with somebody that might be sort of repulsed by any progressive ideas if they're on a different side? Because we've seen in recent past, I mean, the divide in our country has probably never been greater, with sort of this niche social media culture. It's like you get this side of thinking or you get the other. There's very little intermixing. But what I do notice on Bachelor is this weird community that I do talk to people that have completely different political views, and I do leave room for them to leave phone calls or share their opinions, and people can change their mind or not. But I do think it's valuable to be back at the like bargaining table of actually having these conversations. So I know it's a long-winded question, but how do you think you can communicate to people that just vehemently disagree with your ideology?
I think, I mean, I think that the show at its best does show how that can happen. Like, that's why I'm very interested in popular media, is because you can kind of insert these moments where you are having a conversation. And most of the time, the show has done that really poorly. But something that came up a lot in my interviews was Tayshia's season, and that a lot of sensitive issues were handled, I think, quite sensitively and respectfully. So we had the conversation between Ivan and Tayshia about his brother in prison, about police brutality. We had conversations with Ben about suicide, mental health issues, Zach, substance abuse. So I feel like there is room when the show is better than the last season was, and we have a really like strong, confident lead, that those things come up, and then as fans, that opens the door to more conversation. But I think when the show doesn't do that, it is very hard to then have like an even killed conversation, because you go to the comment sections of an online post and it's, on the one side, what's the big deal? Stop going after Eric. And on the other side, it's, you know, extremely angry, extremely hurt, and very loud about it. And, you know, completely against their engagement, or thinking there's something wrong with Gabby for being with him. And because the show didn't take a calm moment to address it, all we have is online noise. So that's where I think it gets really hard to have an actual conversation about it.
Yeah, you're right. The show's done a very poor job of giving like a finished product. So we're left with Greg Grippo. Everyone thinks he's this evil guy, which is hilarious a year later to think about that. And then now it's Tino is the next bad guy. Have you studied at all this sort of like void we leave for finding a villain? Is there something in us that just wants to have an enemy?
I don't know if it's in us. I mean, it is the way the show is edited. Even, you know, we've had one episode of Paradise, and within 6 minutes, it's about having a fight. It's Shanae, and then it's Kira. It's The show has become obsessed with villainy instead of actual love stories. And I think also reality television has this strange ability to get its audience so emotionally involved, because even though we know that it's constructed, like psychologically, it is a real person, and we can't find the line between that real person and the show, and neither can the person who was on it, by the way. So I think we all then we've seen these moments, and they remind us of an ex-boyfriend or a father figure or something, and it's very hard not to get emotionally involved. But again, I think it's on the editing and the production of the show. I think there's a way to make this show that the audience becomes less toxic in response.
Yeah, it almost shows us what humanity can become given just a slight nudge in the wrong direction. You mentioned something that was very interesting about how we can't really differentiate between these being real people, and even if they do or say something real, like take Shanae. I've been one to say, hey, I'm not saying what Shanae said was right or wrong, but what people are capable of doing when they feel like their back is in the corner, they feel like they're ganged up on, they're lacking sleep, they've had alcohol, they don't have their social media. When you take all these factors, I mean, it doesn't take a real genius producer to coerce people to act at their lowest level. And as a comedian, I look at different mediums for comedy that get away with things that others don't. Cartoons get away with a ton of dirty and dark humor because we don't see them as real humans, so they can say something someone else can't. Same thing with ventriloquists. There's something about holding up a sock puppet that ventriloquists say wild things, but it's not coming out of that person's mouth. So there is this fine line that we have when we can take offense to what someone says versus what they don't. And there's just something about this show, and maybe it's just seeing the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, that I don't get that riled up at these villains. It just doesn't do it for me. And I wonder if people are just not there and they're watching the show as if everything they see happened, at a Starbucks coffee date versus it being highly pressure cooker situation. So what can people do to have more grace for these humans as they navigate edited television for the first time?
So there's two psychological concepts that I use in my dissertation, and one, which most people are familiar with, is identification. So it's this idea that you're looking at a character and you so identify with them, you see similarities between you and them, thus that you start seeing the narrative from the inside. So I think that's something that does happen a lot with The Bachelor. You end up placing yourself in, you're thinking, which person would I choose? How would I handle this date? What would I do in this dramatic scenario? So we have that. And then on the other side, it's similar, but a slight difference is parasocial interaction. And that is when you are basically seeing the people as friends. When you have friends in real life, you don't identify with them from the inside. You still have cognitive distance. And I think the parasocial aspect can still get tricky. People seem to think that they really do know these people. But I try to do what I can to not identify and experience this traumatic show from inside, and remember that these are people that are distant from me. But beyond parasocial, you have to remember that it's edited and you really don't know them at all, like a friend. But I'm with you. I don't get as enraged by the villains, though perhaps Shanae is an exception for me.
Yeah, no, I see, I see Shanae as someone who will say what needs to be said to fight. I see her as a fighter. And again,
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying
Mhm.
I know these people, and maybe that's just because I get out there and meet people all across the country. I mean, where do you live, by the way? Are you on the West Coast?
So I'm in LA. I've been in London the past year, so right now I'm a nomad, but I'm going back to
Oh,
LA.
nice. Well, so in Los Angeles, it's a very liberal city, but I can do comedy 1 hour or 30 minutes north, even where Tino's from in Santa Clarita, and it's a completely conservative town. Orange County is very conservative. So
Yeah.
people think SoCal's this crazy left-leaning place, and while it does skew that way, I rub elbows with people of all different paths, and what I see is that even if people, and this isn't to say that conservatives are bad people or that they don't have good policies. A lot of times liberals and conservatives working together politically can be a good thing when it's not gridlocked. Currently, different subject. But I see people that just are trying the best with their community, and some people are better at empathizing with others than other people are. And we're just humans that are supposed to be stuck in these small knit communities. And now we're exposed to much bigger things. And we've kind of got this like gender and race and all these different sort of things that are here dividing us when there's just a show making money off of it all. Like the show doesn't care. There's no emotions there. There's no producers other than maybe the creator, but none of the producers have to worry about getting attacked online afterwards. They get to just operate and let these villains air themselves out. And as contestants have said, Chris Randone had just said it, that he had considered suicide along with many others. And there's other shows where that has happened tragically. So, I mean, do you think something could happen that, well, I'll put it this way. ABC, owned by Disney, they don't need Bachelor. Bachelor franchise is a cash cow. It's easy for them. But if the right scandal came up, it would be gone in a second. They can take that loss. So do you think there's anything that could happen in the near future that just shuts this whole project down?
I mean, as much as it is a huge corporation and it's not doing the same numbers as it used to, it's still the most enduring reality romance franchise in television history. So I don't think it's going anywhere. I think it is either going to slowly wither away, or they're going to have to make a concerted effort and lean into streaming, lean into social media. And I think that would save it. I don't think there at this point is like a scandal that could rocket more. I mean, more than that James season, that entire, if that didn't break it.
Yeah.
But I think that's what feels so weird right now. It's this like, going out with not a bang but a whimper. That's how I feel about the franchise right now. It seems like there's not a big scandal that could take it down because it's already weathered all those. But I think if it stays this way, it's just going to slowly, it's not pleasing the conservative side, it's not pleasing the liberal side, and it's not bringing in the numbers, and it's just hanging on to network television when its audience isn't even watching it on network television that much. So I think right now we're just headed towards a slow decline, but it may never go anywhere because it's the longevity that keeps. It's very hard to build a fandom that's going to watch a show for this many years.
Yeah, you're right. And look, I mean, I don't recap any other shows. Everyone's saying, do Love Island, do Love is Blind. I've watched these other shows.
I love Love Island.
They don't get the numbers that Bachelor does. I was requested to interview several different men of the last few seasons to talk about mental health, specifically mental health. I pitched exactly what I wanted to talk about, and I was declined. Not only declined, they refused to even respond to me, but they actually told one of the contestants, I found this out today, that they see my channel as trying to end the show, which I think is ridiculous. The last thing I would want is to end the show. It's been lucrative for me at the very least. But I mean, I can have these conversations where I'm not on their payroll. And I think it's important we all keep on having these conversations. Sometimes the show and they benefit from leaving things not completely finished because it leads this whole internet kind of like, it's the only and last water cooler thing out there that's not sports, because everything else is kind of thrown to us in these giant packages of like 10 episodes at a time. But The Bachelor gives us 6.5 days to really deconstruct things after watching fights, and I guess there's something to be said for them not giving us all of the answers to make us kind of scrap for it. But let me ask you this before we go. Is there anything regarding your dissertation that you wanted to bring up that we didn't talk about here?
I feel like we've covered a lot of it. I'm definitely going to be posting more videos on my TikTok outlining some of the more academic, somewhat dreary concepts that some people seem excited about. So people should head over to my page to check that out. But we've covered a lot of the meat today.
We sure did. It's Marilyn.movies on TikTok and Instagram, right? Do I have that right? And
That's correct.
I'm going to keep an eye on you because I think these are great conversations. And please, if you ever want to come back on the show, we'd love to have you. I appreciate your thoughts on all this. And hopefully, maybe if you're in Los Angeles soon, come out to a stand-up show.
Absolutely. I would love to. Thank you for having me.
Okay, take care. All right, I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you think. And as always, like I said before, make sure to go to patreon.com/Dave Neal for all the behind-the-scenes membership-only content. We'll see you guys later. Bye, everybody.